podcast is a member of WGPRN, WildGamesProductions.com. Hello, folks, and welcome to the Darker Days Radio Podcast, episode number 20. I'm your host, Vince, along with my co-host, Mark, and his surprise Barbie microphone. Mark, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm bringing the pink. Don't you mock my Barbie microphone. It's very manly.
Yeah. You're going to have to tell us the story behind that one.
Okay.
Well, folks, we have a great bunch of shows for you this month. Today we have sitting in the background, nice, quiet, and patient Richard Dansky of former White Wolf's Past. Richard, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
So we're just doing super. And tonight we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the things you've written and some of the things you are writing and what's coming out in the future for you as well, and what it's in store for all the fans out there. So we're going to just sit back and, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you now to tell us a story about the Barbie mic.
Oh, okay. Well, it's real simple. My headset microphone broke. It just gives off a really annoying buzzing noise. And I had a Darkling to record, the one, episode number 9 from the other week. And I couldn't find a microphone, and the only microphone in the house belonged to my 8-year-old daughter from her Barbie sing-along set. So that's what I used. And seeing as it worked so well, I'm using it ever since. So here you go.
Interesting.
Darker Days in pastel shades of pink and purple with a flower on top. It's very good.
Wow.
It's very World of Darkness. It is.
Well, for this month, like we said in the top of the show, we're going to be bringing you a whole bunch of interviews and old things from the past to celebrate our 1 year on the air, Mark. 1 year.
That's right. Anniversary. Happy anniversary, Vince. I can't believe it's been a year since we started this little outing here.
What'd you get me?
I got you a pink microphone.
A pink. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Slightly used.
You know what I got for you, Mark?
What's that?
A mailbag.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. It's empty, I'm afraid.
What?
Primarily, yeah. It's been very quiet on the email, so my refreshing thing, thanks you all. Although we have had a couple of cool Darkling submissions, one on Vampire the Eternal Struggle, which we released a couple of weeks ago, and there's been another one from long-time listener Alakov on converting old World of Darkness Chronicles right over to new World of Darkness Chronicles without breaking continuity. So you can look for that soon. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, cool.
We did have a mail, actually, which I wanted to draw attention to. One listener who subscribes to our show through iTunes was asking how come some of the earlier shows don't appear on his iTunes subscription. That's basically because when the show hasn't been accessed very recently or frequently, iTunes archives it, and it no longer gets offered through their subscription service, and you have to go straight to our website to download it. So if you're an iTunes subscriber and you're having trouble finding our early episodes, just head on over to darkerdays.tk, and you can download them manually there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're just not being fed straight through.
Yeah, that happens a lot of times with iTunes and earlier episodes. A lot of other podcasts, some of the like Libsyn and things like that, they cut them off even further upon that, and you would only have like the last 5 episodes of the show. So be lucky that we even have those.
Yeah. There has been some cool activity at the Facebook page, though, including a petition started by some nutter about my very cool and manly Barbie microphone. So thanks for that, whoever you are.
You're welcome. And you will post up those pictures.
There will be photos, yes. Okay, there will be photos. Fine. And always want to give shout-outs to the newest members of the forums. So hello there to Cynical Prophet, Pope J-Rod, the Marquis von Vimanis, Aramis13, Wolf the Manslayer, Mike Rand, Serial Killer, Jerko, Brains for Breakfast, and Kugon.
What about that other one?
There's one I missed?
Oh, maybe not.
Okay. You dare challenge me on my name lists, Vincent. How dare you?
Okay. Let's dive into some news.
WGPRN News in depth.
Yay, news.
Yes,
Sorry.
and we've had some interesting releases recently from our sister show, Mirage Arcana. They've been cranking them out. They recently had a fantastic interview with James Jacobs from Paizo, talking about the Kingmaker Adventure Path and various other gaming-related things. So if you want to check that out, head over to their podcast and listen to it. It's well worth it. Very cool.
Yeah.
But the main news this month, Vince, is us.
Us? Really?
Yeah, 1 year old.
Oh, wow.
So that's worthy of a news item. We're going to be having a month full of special shows, retrospectives, interviews, special features. We're going to be looking back at the old World of Darkness and those who helped create it, and then bringing things full circle later in the month with a special show jam-packed with the best of the new. And, well, today is the inaugural anniversary show, and we're joined, as Vince said earlier on, by Richard Dansky, whom, if you don't know, has written a really, really ridiculous amount of World of Darkness books. Richard, I went to look at the credits list on penandpaper.net, and there's over 100 of them there.
I think it's 134, but I sort of lost track. We moved into our new house. My wife said, okay, you can keep the role-playing books that you worked on. How about that shelf? No, I did all of those. How about that shelf? No, I did all of those. And that took about a half an hour to go through.
Wow.
Outstanding. Well, I thought Matt McFarlane had written a lot, but my God, you put him to shame. Really prodigious output. Very, very cool.
I didn't sleep a lot in those days, so I had to do something with myself.
Sleep is for the weak. It really is.
Go on, Mark.
Okay, and further news coming from Big Brother White Wolf. Compacts and Conspiracies is out. And this is the PDF release for Hunter the Vigil. Chuck and Eddie both talked about it in previous shows. And, well, it's out. It's been out for a couple of weeks. It gives a more detailed look at each of the compacts and conspiracies covered in the original Hunter the Vigil game rulebook, and contains bonus material and systems relevant to each organization, and also includes endowments for the game's compacts. So that's worth checking out. You can pick that up at the usual spots at Drive-Thru RPG.
Yeah, and I just also found out that Eddie Webb's been two-timing us now, too.
He has. He's just shameless, isn't he?
Yeah, I know. He's been pimping himself out. No, I'm kidding. Eddie Webb's been putting himself out there and talking a lot. He's been over with the Dark Providence forums. Basically, we figured out that is a play-by-post forums. I think, Mark, we took a look at that today, and
yeah, it looks quite interesting. Nice design on the site too.
So if you are
really
looking for games, maybe some play-by-play World of Darkness games, head over to their site, darkprovidence.com. Bunch of good material there. Good bunch of games starting up, so you should take a look at that.
Cool.
Right, Mark?
That's it, yeah. And it was a moderated chat with Eddie, so you've got several pages of insight and ideas on World of Darkness and White Wolf games in general. So yeah, worth a look, worth checking out.
Let's head over to the Secret Frequency now.
It's under the stairs.
Okay, folks, welcome to the Secret Frequency, where we examine true stories from the world and show you how you can take these, twist them around, and use them in your World of Darkness games. Today, we're looking at Angels and Demons, and this was submitted by the doyenne of the Secret Frequency, Law, over at our forums. Thanks for this, Law. She sent us another cracker. The story is about Annie Hooper. Annie Hooper was born in the early part of the 20th century. She had 12 biological brothers and sisters, and over the course of her childhood, 14 foster siblings. Annie married young, and the Hoopers settled at Cape Hatteras in the town of Buxton on the North Carolina coast. There, the pair had only one son, but years later, when World War II broke out, her husband and son both left home to participate in the war effort. Her son enlisted in the Army. Her husband moved north to Newport News, Virginia, to work at the naval shipyard. Now, alone for the first time in her life, Annie had a difficult time coping with the solitude. Her loneliness was intensified by how isolated the North Carolina coast became during the war. Telephone communications, as well as mail deliveries, were intermittent at best, and German submarines began sinking ships within sight of the shore. The stress of war, the isolation, and the loneliness took its toll on Annie's soul, and she broke. She began blacking out, suffering huge holes in her memory, and hearing voices that whispered to her of uncontrollable compulsions. Her husband, naturally worried but unable to return home, told her she could take on boarders to help with the loneliness. So, during the years of the war, Annie did so, and had a total of 35 boarders come through her house. And as long as the house was filled with the real voices of actual people, the voices in Annie's head were quiet. After the war ended, the steady stream of boarders dried up, and Annie was left alone again. The voices quickly returned, as did the blackouts and the huge lapses of time for which she could not account. Then, one day, without purpose or plan, Annie spontaneously gathered driftwood and twigs from the beach and used them to make sculptures of two people about 6 inches high. She then used these sculptures to recreate one of the scenes from her old illustrated family Bible. Like God himself, Annie's first creations were Adam and Eve. Immediately, the malicious voices were silenced, and the blackouts and memory lapses came to an abrupt halt. Over the course of the next 40 years, the malicious voices were kept at bay by the silent guardian sculptures Annie created. She fashioned from driftwood and twigs more than 3,000 of these small sculptures by the time of her death, and filled every flat space on her house with them, every inch of the floor, the tables, the attic, the shelves, all of it. Annie's creations were grouped into scenes by gold tinsel and Christmas lights. Many of the scenes were biblical, depicting battles between good and evil, angels and demons. And many of the scenes were of spiritual realities unrecognizable by any theologian. The scenes themselves were identified by styrofoam placards. Some of the placards were inscribed with the names of the characters present in the scene. Many of the names were of entirely unknown origins. They were not biblical names, and some of the placards held biblical quotes and summaries of spiritual teachings, though more than a few of the verses did not have their origin in the Bible or any other known religious text. Annie Hooper's own private apocalypse became something of a local legend. People came from far and wide to see the house. Annie died in 1986, and when she did, the county collected all of her sculptures and handed them over to North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, as priceless works of folk art. They are currently not on display. So what do we make of Annie Hooper? What did she do in those lost moments she can't remember? Were all of her extra biblical scenes and verses original, or did she get them from another source? Was the poor woman merely suffering from a mental illness brought on by isolation, stress, and loneliness?
Yes.
Not in the world of darkness. Had she actually tapped into a spiritual reality and was, without any knowledge of the occult and solely by intuition, crafting totems to keep a malicious entity at bay? Or was she being directed by an unseen hand to amass an army that still awaits the day of its awakening? Angels or demons, you decide. So, yeah, like so many of these secret frequency submissions, this is the kind of thing that immediately screams out for incorporation in your game, with plot hooks and ideas dripping off it. An obvious choice might be that she is channeling visions of the Umbra or of the spirit world. These various dioramas are recreations of places she has seen in deep spiritual trance, locations beyond the gauntlet on the far side. And if you recall, a few episodes back, we did some coverage of the Voynich manuscript, which likewise contains maps and bestiaries and apothecaries and various biological emblems and diagrams that seem to have no real-world analogues. You could tie these two things together. Maybe Tales of the Voynich manuscript and its contents lead to Annie Hooper, that she is or was someone channeling the same realities, but in a modern era several hundred years later than Voynich's book. Like Law suggested, she could have been contacted by spirit entities and has been preparing vessels for them to inhabit when they come over from the other side to ours.
A good idea for a Demon the Fallen game.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, if you have creatures rising out of the netherworlds, they may need something simple to inhabit in order to be able to explore our world. These small totemic forms could be representations of a form they're later going to take when they breach the barriers between the worlds more fully. This could also give you a nice conspiracy-related reason as to why they've been taken into custody and not exhibited. The county may have gotten hold of them, and yet those in the know, in the shadow world, could have come forward and said, we'll look after these for you in our titanium vault several miles below ground. Thank you very much. Now, Law and Kim went on a road trip to the area in order to actually see the collection. They wanted to actually experience it firsthand and come back with some recordings and some photographs and first-hand accounts of it. But they were told that viewing it is a no-go. In fact, the person they spoke to about it didn't even know where it was being housed. They also discovered that the house in which Annie Hooper had lived no longer seemed to exist, as if all the traces of her work and her presence had just been very conveniently wiped clean. So has the house been demolished? What if the entire house had crossed over into the spirit world or was taken there? It occurred to me that maybe Annie Hooper had left more of her creations hidden in the house, and that they were taken into the spirit world in order to protect them from whoever it is has been hiding them away in our world. So you could craft a mean adventure around needing to locate these effigies. Rather than being in the possession of the museum, maybe they've passed into the hands of a sinister organization, a powerful mage, a group of werewolves who are guarding them to prevent the spirits connected to them from making use of the effigies. Like Law says, you decide. And whatever you decide, you have to make sure to head over to our forums and check out the pictures of these things. She managed to get some scans of Polaroids that were taken a few years ago. Creepy, beyond creepy. Really freakish-looking little things they are. Great stuff.
So we have a couple ideas here you can use if you're Demon the Fallen game, or Mark said maybe a mage game, or I was thinking a good hunter game to recollect these artifacts to bring them in. Richard, what do you think about that?
Yeah, does this spark any spooky ideas for you, Rich?
Absolutely. I've actually been to Buxton. It's a lovely town. It's out in Cape Hatteras, and the Atlantic right by there is actually called the Graveyard of the Atlantic because so many ships have gone down.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So, you could get a little bit of a ghostly connection there. Some of the spirits that were attached to some of the ships that went down. A few other possibilities.
Yeah. Fun.
Cool.
So that's interesting. You could have her then. She's channeling the ghosts of dead sailors who are. Law's story mentioned the sinking of the ships by German submarines, and she then finds herself being contacted by them and finding some way to bring them some kind of rest or maintain contact with the world of the living.
Absolutely. Or ships have been going down there for a long time, so maybe something was pulling those ships down, and that could be an angle. There's also, I believe, another local ghost legend related to Theodosia Burr, the daughter of Aaron Burr, and perhaps you could conflate those two. So there's just absolutely a wealth of supernatural material related to that area that you could play with.
How does the Theodosia story go?
If I remember correctly, she was on a vessel headed north to reunite her with her father, and it was wrecked. She was the only survivor of the wreck, and if memory serves, she went quite mad and lingered for a long time along the beach in the Outer Banks. So there's multiple versions of the story, but there's at least some solid historical basis there.
Oh, wow, okay. So that's something worth looking into as well. Cool, nice tip.
Okay, cool. Well, thank
you. Yeah, thanks to Laura again for digging that one up. Laura has produced some of our finest Secret Frequency submissions. So Laura, keep on being creepy. We love it.
And we have pages and pages of Secret Frequencies. People actually ask me on Facebook, how do I submit that? I told them, just go right to the forums, wildgamesproductions.com. And
drop us an email.
Right in the Darker Days forum, there's a whole thread there that says Secret Frequency submissions, and there's, 10, 12, 15 pages worth of stuff there.
We've got a great backlog we're continually working through. There's a couple of great ones coming recently about pyramid-shaped tombs in Liverpool, which we're going to get to shortly. Very enjoyable.
Definitely. And let's get on to the main part of the show, and that is Richard Dansky. And we have a whole bunch of questions, as you saw, Richard, for you. But we're going to start off with the most important question: how did you start in gaming? As far as writing,
I was an original D&D blue boxer, actually. Ooh. So I've been gaming since, I guess, 6th grade. The set that I had was actually one of the ones that predated them, including dice in the box. So you had these little...
So you had the chits. Oh, right.
Yep, and I remember I was very, very excited when I finally got my first set of polyhedron dice. Unfortunately, they were sort of melon orange.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really not the most, what you'd call prepossessing dice. But I started off, as I said, as a blue boxer, and there were a few kids in my school who played, and from there we branched out into Villains and Vigilantes and the Chaosium Michael Moorcock games and Call of Cthulhu, and really anything we can get our hands on. I was actually very lucky in that my parents really liked the fact that I was doing role-playing games because they thought it would spark imagination and help with my storytelling. I was writing even then. So whenever my mom saw some sort of role-playing module on sale somewhere, she would buy that and bring it home. And so I ended up with this incredibly diverse collection of James Bond role-playing game Game Master screens and Dungeons & Dragons modules and whatever she found, and that all sort of synthesized into all the games that my group of friends would play.
That is really cool. Wow.
That's lucky, because all I got was that you're going to go straight to hell for playing those games. So, anyway, Mark, why don't you go on to the next one? Okay, Mark is having some mic difficulties, so we'll just go on to the next question. How did you get started in game designing and writing? Was White Wolf your first writing gig?
White Wolf was my first professional writing gig. I'd known Jennifer Hartshorn in college. Actually, we had done LARPing and a few other things together, and she went down to White Wolf, and she was actually the first person to contract me for some work in Haunts, actually. And that was my first professional writing. And I remember I actually wrote most of that. I did 2 chapters in that book, the Tillinghast Mansion and a casino in Atlantic City. And I wrote that while I was proctoring fake SATs for high school kids in the basement of this church in, I think it was Norwood, Massachusetts, outside Boston. I was doing graduate work at Boston College then, and the only time I had when I could actually sit down and write was I was administering these fake exams for the review. So I'm crammed in at this desk, which is designed for a 9-year-old, frantically scribbling while I'm hearing C, C, B, B, A, A in the background, and that's how a lot of that got written.
That's the Wraith book, Haunts?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. That's a good book, then. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my mic there. I didn't hear anything odd here.
Oh, you just cut out. No problem.
Like the subject material, or what?
And just for our listeners who don't know, you wrote for White Wolf from like 94 through to
2003.
2003, was it?
Yeah,
I think that was the last one. The last projects I actively did were the Book of Changing Breeds for Werewolf, Abyssals for Exalted, and some fiction for the initial Orpheus book. And those 3 all seemed like good ways to come full circle on the things that I'd done for White Wolf.
Yes.
Right. It's a good considerable stretch. I mean, and with a massive output as well. I was trying to find a particular game that you'd worked most on, and apart from the obvious like Wraith, it just seemed that you were, as a contributor or an author or a developer, all over the place. So you really got a good feel for the World of Darkness across the board, it looks.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed the setting, and I really enjoy writing. So anytime there was an interesting project, I was very happy to take it on. It was such a rich and rewarding sandbox, for lack of a better way of putting it, to play in. There was so much in the World of Darkness, and there were so many possibilities. So I always would hear about an opportunity and go, "Ooh, that sounds cool! I could do this with it, and I can do this with this." And it was just fun to tackle all the different angles.
Excellent. Well, what was it like working for White Wolf back in those early days? I mean, in 1994, the game lines have only been going for a couple of years then.
It was insomniacal, for one thing. I started, actually, freelancing while I was still up in Boston, and I was hired as the Wraith developer and the Mind's Eye Theater developer at the beginning of the summer of '95. I actually did my first couple books from Boston. But when I moved down, it was definitely a very different experience from the day job I'd had up there. I'd worked in an office, and it was suit and tie, and White Wolf, there were a lot of action figures and loud music and people bringing their dogs into work and wearing Lucador masks and people in the office playing Darkstalkers at 3 in the morning, and it was just a very different vibe. But it was also really, and I hate to sound trite with this, but it was really exciting because everybody really cared about the books and was really excited about what we were doing, and we'd really all kill ourselves to make sure these things were as good as possible.
Yeah.
So when I say, there were people there at 3 in the morning, there were people there at 3 in the morning. I wasn't the only one. And, we would do what it took to make sure the books were as good as is humanly possible.
Well, you can really feel that sort of excitement and passion when you're reading over some of the early material. It really does drip off the page. Now, you mentioned you got hired as the developer for Wraith fairly early on then, and you did a lot of work on that line. What was it like getting started on such, for the time, what was such a dark and unusual game line?
To paraphrase Beetlejuice, I myself am dark and unusual, so it was a pretty good fit. I'd done my thesis on Lovecraft, and I loved
really? Okay.
Art fiction. Yeah, my first publication was actually in the academic journal Lovecraft Studies. It's H.P. Lovecraft, Spheres of Influence, Transgression, and the Use of the Utterly Other. I want to say that was the title in issue 31. So, I was already soaking in this long before I came to White Wolf. And it was just a great match of subject matter and person to go wallowing in the subject matter.
Yes.
But, it was, like I said, I loved the classic horror. I love ghost stories. And I was very widely read in horror at that point, so it was just a great opportunity to play with all the stuff that I've been thinking about reading these books and thinking about what Lovecraft had done.
So do you think that, was he a strong influence on the design that you did for Wraith, or did you synthesize a number of horror influences, or how did that go?
It really was a synthesis. Back in the day, I got asked a lot, what were the most important things in building Wraith? And the two answers I gave actually were Hesiod's Theogony and Thornwild's Our Town, just in terms of sort of the philosophical underpinnings. But the actual constructs, Lovecraft, Thomas Ligotti, Algernon Blackwood, M.R. James, all of those really classic horror writers who understood that sometimes less is more in storytelling, and sometimes you really just can throw everything at the reader and go over the top.
Right. Excellent. Do you still play Wraith?
I don't play, but I really wish I could. Unfortunately, the job I've got now sends me on the road all the time, so I can't really set up a consistent campaign of anything. But I do have all the books, and they are in my office in a place of honor. And if I ever actually get a good long stretch at home, I may yet fire the campaign back up again.
Oh, nice. That'd be fun. Now, last episode, I think it was, Vince, we did a special feature on Dark Reflections Spectres, which was a particularly grim book. Do you have any particular memories about working on that supplement? Did you have to visit more graveyards than normal that week, for example, or?
Well, I was in Boston, so most of the graveyards that I could get access to were pretty thoroughly weathered. They were 300, 400 years old, and Boston weather had done a number on the stones. So, no, that was actually the very first book I worked on, and the authors on it, this one was in Australia, if I remember correctly, and so there'd be a lot of frantic 1 a.m. emails and things like that. I was actually doing that from Boston before I moved down to Atlanta, so most of the development was actually done at my then-girlfriend's kitchen table, frantically in the middle of the night, and looking at the concept art and gone in and go, ooh, I'm not showing her this one.
No.
Nice.
But it really was the dive into deep water, because that was about as twisted as it got, and
yeah. Well, I remember vividly the first time I read that book. I was on a long bus ride somewhere, middle of the day on the bus, and having to just take every 20 minutes, look out the window at the trees and the flowers and the sun, and okay, deep breath, back into the book. It was really quite a striking read.
Thank you. It really was very well written. The project was underway by the time I came on board, so I was just able to pick it up and run with it. But people really seemed to have strong feelings about that book, and they mostly liked it, and they found it useful for the games, which was, of course, the most important thing.
Well, that was the focus. That was the focus of our feature last week. Was okay. Let's look at these things, these specters, and let's take things from the book and show how it lets you plug them right into play immediately. So yeah, it's rather than just sort of gratuitous exploration of nastiness, it's full of information and ideas and hooks, and no, I'm really impressed. So what's the favorite book that you worked on for the Wraith line? Do you have a favorite baby there?
Oh dear. The one that was probably the most fun was the Shadow Player's Guide, because that just let everybody pull out all the stops and go to town. The Shadow voice was interesting. It was a lot of fun to play with, and if you were writing in that voice, you could really cut loose in a lot of ways. So that one was a lot of fun to work on. Obviously, the one that I'm most proud of is Charnel Houses of Europe. But
yes,
I wouldn't call that one a fun project to work on.
No, and that's a remarkable book because it's still mentioned today and held in high regard as something that treats an awful subject with intelligence and respect, and it's often pointed to as an example of here's how you do it right. So yeah, that's definitely one worth remembering.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a very hard book to do, obviously, and there was a lot of soul searching involved. And I was very lucky to have the support of my family and Janet Berliner, who wrote the introduction, and of White Wolf in doing that project. And I really appreciate the effort that everyone who's involved with it put in, and the dedication to doing that right.
Was that something you'd pitched yourself then, a topic you wanted to tackle, or was it floated within the company as a supplement?
That one was my idea. I drove that forward. I mean, we were very, very intent on this whole games for adults. We're doing mature games. These things aren't kid stuff. But there was this curious lacuna in the timeline when you got to World War II.
Yeah.
And I figured if we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. We're going to tackle this head on. This is subject matter that seems to offer that opportunity. And like I said, there was a lot of soul searching, and there were a few people who did spit takes when I said that I wanted to do it. But they backed me, and Mark Senzik, who wrote under the name Jonathan Black, and Rob Hatch, and Janet Berliner, who did the introduction, did a wonderful, wonderful job with it. And it really put me through the ringer, but I believe it was worth it. Actually, got to talk to Art Spiegelman very briefly about that book. He was in Atlanta.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he was doing a reading for. Trying to remember what the reading was for, but he was doing a reading, and afterwards I was able to go up to him and say how much I appreciated his work, and that I was doing this book, and he looked at me and said, "Good luck."
Excellent. Now, Wraith eventually it came to its end, and from the perspective of a consumer, of a buying gamer, it seemed to come to its end a little sooner than I was expecting. What was it like wrapping it up from your end? Was that hard to do? I mean, could you see it coming? Did you guys get much notice that Wraith was going to finish?
We did get some notice, and I'll give White Wolf Management full credit for letting us do Ends of Empire to really wrap everything up and have it go out with a bang. It's a lot of game lines, a lot of comic book lines, whatever. They just chop them off, boom, that's done. And we were given the opportunity to, really tie everything up and make sure that we gave folks, what they've been looking for. We didn't leave too many threads dangling. And it wasn't, we didn't have, 3 years and then it ends kind of advance warning. I'd sort of done a much longer story arc that I was hoping to work out, but there was enough time to compress stuff down to get all the key elements in there.
Okay, right. I mean, the Ends of Empire contains, is it one or two of the Guild books? I can't remember. I think it's got one or two of them in. Were there other books in planning that never saw the light of day? I mean, you mentioned an extended arc, but were there actually books sitting on the development schedule that were just, that had to get kicked?
There were a few books on the schedule or that had been proposed that got cut, And, some of those, like Memoirs of a Ferryman, never got past the, okay, it's going to be this many pages, and it's hopefully going to come out this month stage, and others got their content folded into Ends of Empire.
Okay, what was Memoirs of a Ferryman going to be about?
That was going to be a Book of Nod-style book from the viewpoint of a ferryman.
Oh, how cool.
Wow. That would have been interesting, yeah.
Again, that never really got past the, okay, here's what I like to have on the schedule stage, but there was that. There was going to be a book on the Unlidded Eye. There was going to be some more material exploring the far shores. Like I said, I'd done this J. Michael Straczynski-esque massive Babylon 5 plot arc with what the signposts were and what the key books to be whenever. And when the end came, I was fortunately able to just sort of compress it down and make sure that all the big questions got answered.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. Now, you then went on, you said, to work on Orpheus briefly. What was that like after having spent so much time with Wraith?
It was actually very pleasant. Lucien Solbaum was the developer on that book. Lucien's an old and dear friend of mine. He'd started writing for me very early on, and having the chance to swap roles and me do some writing for him, that felt cool. He did a great job with the book, and it was a real pleasure to work for him.
Cool. Orpheus is a good little line, and it's nice. It's nice that it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's just 6 supplements and done. It's a nice format.
Yep.
Now, finally from me, before I let Vince take over take the wheel for a bit, you also did a smattering of work on Mage. This is purely selfish because I'm a huge Mage fan. What was that like to work on? I mean, I noticed you worked on things like the Book of Mirrors or the fantastic Book of Worlds. They must have been a blast to contribute to. Not to mention, I saw you had some credits for the second edition core book as well.
I have to confess, my credit on the second edition core book was largely due to the fact that I was the only person at White Wolf who knew how to use the indexing function on PageMaker. So for a long time, I was the one doing the indexes, and then generally that was at 3 in the morning because it took that long for everybody else to finish up. And
Wow.
then I'd have to go out in the morning. But yeah, that was my credit on Mage Second.
Well, it's got an index that works, which is not always to be said about White Wolf books. So, congratulations there.
Thank you. I worked hard on those, and I did sprinkle a few Easter eggs. If you look in the Oblivion Index, I think there's a reference to my favorite bar from Boston and a few other things. So,
okay. Were you responsible for the pants?
no, the pants was Ethan. I think the character sheet for Noisha was asymmetrical, and they needed one more stat to put in there, and he just said pants, which is pure Ethan. So, I mean, I love it.
Nice. Okay, cool. I got a couple brief questions for you. When we spoke earlier about White Wolf, how it was working for them in the office, you talked about the people that were writing the actual books. How about the executives? What were they like back then?
Oh, you see, they were up in the front of the building, and to get to them, you actually had to cross this tiger pit, and then there was this moat, and there were these alligators, and no, it was a very informal company. So, anybody would come by and talk to anybody and offer their opinions on anything at any time. And we had a vicious series of lunchtime Dune board game matches.
Nice.
Generally, at least one of the Wick brothers would be in that, and Ben Monk, who was the controller. So again, it was a very accessible and open company, and there wasn't, you didn't have layers and channels to go through if you wanted to get yourself heard.
Oh, wow, cool. Well, we've been hearing that a lot about White Wolf, them being not so formal like that, being very laid back and fun to work with, pretty much. Let's look at one of your books that you had written for Vampire the Masquerade. I have in front of me the Clan Book La Sombra for 2nd edition Vampire the Masquerade. Now, you were the main developer, creditor, writer on this book, along with Elizabeth Dirchburn. And I was looking through this book the other day, and how much of this book did you plan and write, I was wondering, and what things you exactly worked on in this book, if you remember back that far?
Oh, boy, that is a long way back. The central sort of conceit of them as having these ties to Spanish nobility and the Real Conquista, that actually came out of some of the academic work I was doing at the time. I was doing a master's at Boston College initially, and I was getting into a lot of the really classic Gothic novels like Melmoth the Wanderer and The Monk by Matthew Lewis, and all of those had these very lurid things set in Spain with the Inquisition and torture chambers and cannibal monks and all that stuff. And so that a lot of what's in that book bubbled out of that interest of mine, that academic work of mine. And Elizabeth and I worked on the book sort of bouncing up from that conception.
Oh, wow. One thing I really, really like about this book is, well, first of all, it's easy to read because it's black with the white writing. But I really like the fact that it's told from story point of views of someone telling a story to another person, and you incorporate all the different, disciplines and flaws and merits, and you kind of make it into a story and then put in parentheses what it actually means, as opposed to just saying, here's the merit, this is what it does, blah, blah, blah. I think that was really interesting, and I was wondering how you decided to take that approach as opposed to the straightforward approach.
Well, I figured we were far enough along in the Clan Book series, I could try something a little different, and the book itself has a strong voice that it just seemed natural to try it that way. There were actually a lot of message board complaints, back in the heyday of Alt Games White Wolf, and people who didn't think that there were any new powers or new stats or anything else in the book, so they couldn't find it because they weren't in the traditional format.
Oh.
But like I said, it really, once the writing got started, that book had such a strong voice and a strong tone to it, it seemed to make perfect sense to try and do something a little different and not break the reader's immersion with slapping straight rules at them.
Well, I've had this book for a long time, since I'm looking at '96, and have always used this as the Somber book. I know another one came out for the revised edition, but I've always referred back to this one because I just like the style it's written and it's easy to understand. So I do thank you for writing that book.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And it was a collaborative effort, and it was a lot of fun to work on. And I promise I didn't spend more than 10 or 15 minutes a day slapping my hand on top of my head and imitating the guy on the cover as I was walking around the office.
Nice. We'll have to post a picture so everybody who is unfamiliar with the book understands what he's talking about. Anyway, let's step over to another Vampire the Masquerade, the revised edition, which you are credited for writing in this book. Now, for this, what exactly did you remember writing in this? Because Vampire was already set in its ways, but the revised edition was just updating and correcting and fixing.
It was, a lot of, that was Rob Hatch and Justin Achille, and Vampire had really sprawled so much that it made sense to sort of refocus everything.
Right.
And what I did was the introduction, the epilogue, the fiction in there, some of the rules material. Trying to remember if I did the storytelling chapter as well, but it was a really interesting book to be working on. And as we were doing that, we also knew we were going to be doing Guide to the Sabbat and Guide to the Camarilla, and I did the bulk of the work on Camarilla. And it really sort of felt like a unified take on Vampire. All those were part of a larger whole. But there was, I think the getting the chance to do those little short fiction pieces, the chapter opener, was actually the most enjoyable part of that, because you got to really distill vampire storytelling down into 300, 400 words and try and tell an entire story and give people ideas coming from just that little tiny snippet of text. And, judging from the reaction we got, people really liked those and were able to use those as springboards.
Oh, the beginning fiction of the book really? You wrote that? Oh, awesome. That was a great story that was being told there. I really love this whole entire book. I've played it for so many years on end, but okay, let's move into one of the final questions I have for you. Dark Ages, the Dark Ages line, the Vampire of the Dark Ages, or Dark Ages Vampire. Did you have a hand in any of that, and what did you think about those lines?
I was actually the developer on Vampire of the Dark Ages for a while.
Oh.
Initially, again, that was Jen Hartshorn, and the project had been initiated, I want to say, under Andrew Greenberg. It's just a source book, and everybody saw the potential, and under Jen, it got expanded to a supplementary rule book with its own rules and its own take on things. And that was not what I would call a particularly easy development process, and there was a lot of back and forth because obviously it was something that people were very passionate about. At the same time, they're a little nervous about it because it was something, taking another take on something that was so beloved and people were really into. But that started that way, and then I think Justin did a couple books on it, and then I moved into that role after I handed off Wraith. And it was a lot of fun for me to play with because I'm a huge history buff. And I love this notion of, as William Manchester put it, world lit only by fire. This, taking vampires or creatures of darkness and throw them into this world where, after the sun goes down, it's dark. There's these tiny fire-lit enclaves, and that's it. And also one where faith was so powerful and so strong, such a central aspect of what people did. And being able to play with those sorts of strictures and ideas was a lot of fun for somebody with the particular flavor of nerd hobbies that I had.
Well, we're big fans of the Dark Ages line here on the show. We had Matt McFarland on as our first guest way back a year ago. So yeah, it was really interesting to see your name attached to that as well. I saw that you'd wrote to Jerusalem by Night.
Yes, the original cover art for that is actually hanging on my living room wall.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice. Oh, cool. That's a good book.
That was, thank you. It was that was a juggling act. There were an awful lot of authors taking that one in a lot of different directions. And so the most interesting thing about that was trying to unify all of these different authors into a sort of singular vision. And obviously, with subject matter like that, it's also a little sensitive. So making sure that we did right by the subject material.
Well, it's also interesting because its structure was atypical. There's not a typical single vampire ruler. There's a number of shifting interacting factions and allegiances, and it made for quite a startling and unusual read as well, the way it was put together.
Thank you. The city itself is so iconic, and the history has featured so many waves of conquest coming through, and so many people laying claim to that city that it seemed to make sense to do that sort of narrative.
I remember we commented when we reviewed that book a while back, Mark, that I was saying the story of Cain in the beginning of the Dark Ages book. I loved that whole entire story about him and how everything came to be and the story down on. Did you write that, Richard, or?
No, that one wasn't me. I did do the intro fiction for Dark Ages, but but not the history, as it were.
Oh, okay. Well, that was still just wonderful too. So.
Yeah, the original Vampire of the Dark Ages kicked off for me a chronicle that lasted for 10 years, spawned by just the inspiration of that original book. So we got a huge amount of enjoyment out of that line. That's very good.
Cool. Mark,
now,
let's move over to some just get into Richard himself now.
Yeah, moving on from White Wolf, because it's several years in the past for you now. I looked at your Wikipedia entry today, and to be honest, the thing that stood out the most is that you're credited with creating the humorous T-shirt which reads, "Don't tell me about your character." Is this true?
I'll tell you what is true. I need to update the Wikipedia page. Actually, what happened was a guy, I believe his name was Jody Applegate, came up with that shirt and had it at Origins. I want to say 96, and got absolutely mobbed at the booth that year with people wanting to tell me and Justin Achille, who was there with me, about their characters. And I will say that it's fun talking to people about what they're doing with the game. It's really interesting and exciting hearing what people are doing and that they're having fun with everything else. And you don't want to just hear about their characters, because people will tell you everything about their characters because they're proud of them and they're excited about them and they're invested in them. And Jody saw this going on, came over and said, "You need this more than I do." And then he started making up the nice ones. He had the nice ones ready by Gen Con, so he actually should have the credit, and that's one of the reasons I need to update that page. I like to think that I helped popularize it by wearing it everywhere and hoping people took the hint, but credit where credit is due.
So let's talk about our character. No, I'm kidding.
You talk about Wolfman Jack.
No.
Now you've had a fair bit of success as well with writing fiction, both media tie-in and your own original work. Now I'm guessing you started with the tie-in work first.
Yes, the first published fiction I had was actually in the Dark Tyrants anthology that we did for Dark Ages, and it's a continuation of the opening fiction from Vampire of the Dark Ages. But started doing tie-in stuff. I did a Deadlands story for the Anthology with No Name. Did the La Sombra novel, the Exalted novels, and sort of branched out from there.
Okay, right. And did that help you in getting your original work published? I mean, did you have to go through the regular channels of finding an agent and a publisher, or had you already managed to make contacts that smoothed that road for you?
Well, the agent I'm actually working with now, Robert Fleck, is with Janet Berliner's agency, Professional Media Services. So the groundwork for that relationship was laid when she did the introduction to Charnel Houses of Europe.
Right.
But at the same time, I still had to write a book that Bob thought was worth representing. So, he can let you knock on the door, but you still have to produce the goods.
Yes. And how do you find that working on tie-in media differs from working on your original material? I guess the obvious thing is you have a lot more freedom when you're working on your own stuff.
There's a lot more freedom, but in some ways it's a lot more work. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy both, actually. The benefit to doing tie-in stuff is that somebody has already created the world, the rules, the structures, the history, everything like that, and you don't have to worry about building all that from scratch. You can just sort of take a look around and say, okay, here's the space I have to play in, let's go play. With an original project, there are no rules. And while the freedom is exhilarating, it's also risky in that you have to build everything from the ground up. And
Right.
so there's a lot of pleasure to be found in writing in either of those scenarios. They both have benefits to me as a writer.
Okay. Okay. Now, Vince mentioned this to me actually when we were talking about getting you on the show, that you're currently working for Ubisoft as the Central Clancy Writer.
And that is correct.
What does that entail? What is that?
Well, I've been with Red Storm / Ubisoft for 11 years since I left White Wolf. And in my role as Central Clancy Writer, I'm sort of a writing resource for Ubisoft, primarily on the Tom Clancy's games, like Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, Hawks, End War, things like that. But on other games, if they need me to step in. And my day-to-day role actually varies a lot. It can be anything from, hey, Rich, here's the story we're thinking of for this game. Can you take a look at it and make sure that we're not repeating something we did in Rainbow Six Black Arrow 7 years ago? Or it can be something like, please write the script. It depends on the project and the needs and the timeline and everything else. So, the most recent game I worked on was Splinter Cell Conviction, where I was actually the scriptwriter on that game, working with Mike Lee, whom you might remember from Demon the Fallen. That was something that I was working on for 3+ years. At the same time, There's some things that just come across my desk and I look at it and go, yep, this is cool, this is cool. No, we already did a mission there. And that's the depth of my involvement.
Okay, and you said you moved on to that straight from White Wolf.
Yes.
I mean, did you? How did you get that job? Did you just fall into it, or were they advertising, or how did that go?
I don't think I fell into it. I think I was pushed, actually. When there was a very lucky sort of confluence of factors. Right around the time that I came up here, Red Storm, which had not yet been acquired by Ubisoft, was doing a game based on Series A and the McCaffrey novels, and they wanted a designer with a strong writing background. And one of the folks here, Dave Weinstein, was a friend and really liked my work, and he suggested very strongly and many times that I apply.
Was that the Perrin series?
No, it was actually a game called Freedom. It's based on a science fiction series that wasn't tied into the Pern universe at all.
Right.
With Dave's urging, I submitted a resume and was mildly surprised when I got a phone call saying, hey, we'd like to fly you out for an interview. Okay. So that was my initiation into video games. The White Wolf work was the body of work that enabled me to get the interview, and that was 1999. I worked on Freedom and a Tom Clancy's Power Play games called Shadow Watch, just doing some writing, and from there I've just sort of been able to learn as I went and work on a lot of games since then.
So how does this compare to creating material for tabletop role-playing games? I mean, have you had to, or did you already have you had to develop a body of knowledge about how computer games work or how console games work, or are you largely on the sort of creative side of things?
You have to know how games work to write games, and not just. I'm not speaking in terms of you have to know coding, though that obviously is helpful. I'm terrible at that stuff, but
right.
But you do have to understand how games work and that games are comprised of systems. And you have to play games and understand the role that writing has in a game, a game as opposed to a tabletop game. The two biggest differences, I think, are this. One is that tabletop role-playing work is in many ways solitary or a very small team.
Right.
And if something was wrong with the book, I could go in and fix it. If we were 5,000 words short, I would sit down and write it. If something needed to change, I would change it. If a rule was broken, I would make the adjustment. And there's a lot of individual capability to make stuff happen. In a video game team, particularly the AAA titles that I work on, like Splinter Cell, these are huge teams. These are hundreds of people, and everything you do affects the work of many, many other people. So you can't do things on your own. You're always part of a much bigger team and a much bigger process, and so you have to be aware of how your work has repercussions for everyone else. Speaking, just as a writer, okay, if I write a line of dialogue, I write that dialogue. Someone has to record it. A sound engineer has to implement it in the game. An animator has to make sure the facial implements, facial animations to make sure the dialogue looks good go in. The level designer needs to make sure that that line is scripted to go off at the exact right time, and so on and so forth. All these people are involved in what is on the surface just a very simple line of dialogue. And so you have to be aware of all that and be part of the team. And it's not better and it's not worse. It's just a very different sort of game-making experience. In tabletop, all the tools are in the imagination. You can have anything you want. In a video game, absolutely everything has to be on the disc and has to be thought of and has to be planned for. So that sort of difference in what your actual tool set is means lots of differences in the actual process of putting it together. And I guess that leads to the other point, which is that tabletop games are very much about open-ended. The rule that I always had for my writers when I was developing Wraith was one plot hook per paragraph, no matter what. One story idea per paragraph. And you're encouraging people to take stuff and run with it and go wherever the hell they want. You want them to go beyond the bounds of the book. You want to serve as a launching pad. And that's the key to doing a successful RPG book. On video games, there's only a limited set of things that players can do. You can't make Sam Fisher stop and suddenly play Mahjong, for example. So what you want to do is design a game and write a game and tell a narrative within the game that makes players want to do the things that you're set up to do. You want the story to encourage people to run around to Sam Fisher and jump out of shadows and pull people out windows and things like that. You want them to want to do the things that you can do. And so it's a very closed sort of aspect of design, at least in these linear narrative games that I've been working on. But you're trying to do it very gracefully so people don't bang up against the walls of the possibilities. Instead, they go along for the ride and enjoy what they can do.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So, if you had to recommend me one title, I play Xbox 360 games. If you had to recommend me one title that you've worked on recently that I should check out, which one would it be?
I would definitely say Conviction. It is a wonderful game. Max Belland, who's the creative director on it, is absolutely brilliant. He and I have worked together on various games going all the way back to Rainbow Six Raven Shield.
Good game.
Back in 2001, I think, was when we first started working together. And he did a fantastic job on that. The whole team did an amazing job on it. So would highly recommend picking that one up, jumping in.
Cool. Well, might give me a break from playing endless hours of Left 4 Dead 2, so that'll be cool.
God, more.
Now, we had a look at your blog, your website before you came on the show. You seem to have been extremely busy doing a number of book signing tours. Has this been for Firefly Rain?
Yes. The paperback edition of Firefly Rain came out in April. The hardback actually came out back in 2008. But we actually had to cancel the first book signing on account of Volcano. I was in England doing some work at Ubisoft studio in Newcastle. And the day before I was set to go home and then drive to Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where the book signing was going to be, one of my coworkers there said, "Hey, Rich, have you looked at the weather report?"
Excellent.
So what could you tell it? Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Karen Vince. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, what can you tell us about this book, and how would our World of Darkness listeners relate to this book, and how would it interest them if they want to pick it up and read it?
Well, it is a ghost story. It is a little bit of a Southern Gothic, what I call snowbird Gothic, because I've been living in the South for 15 years, but I'm originally from Brooklyn and Philadelphia and other points on I-95 in the Northeast. But it's about the consequences of unkept promises and about the power of home. And I think those are elements that reflect in a different way some of the themes of Wraith. Obviously, fetters were unfinished business, and the spirit of the place could be reflected in the architecture that you saw in the Shadowlands long after a physical building had been destroyed. And while this doesn't tackle those themes in the same way, it is very much about the power of promises and commitment, and about the sort of genius loci of the place where you come from and the pull that has on you. there's a lot that's left unsaid at the end of the book, I think, about the town of Merrifield, which is where the story is set. And I think there's plenty of material for enterprising storytellers to run with that and see where they could go.
Cool. And we were looking at your blog. We also discovered you discovered the delights of Yorkshire pudding. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was actually stranded in London for an extra week. I know it's a terrible place to be stranded.
Oh,
Of all the cities in the world to get trapped by a volcano, you can do an awful lot worse than London. And I have many friends in London whom I've met either through White Wolf or the video game writing, and they all went on what Rihanna Pratchett called Rich Quest, which was meeting up with me for dinner or drinks or whatever in the various nights of my confinement in London. And so actually, it's Adam Tinworth, Adders from the old Wraith list, who folks may remember, and his wife, and Rihanna and I took an afternoon wandering around Islington, and we stopped for lunch, and that was my first Yorkshire pudding. And of course, with all those eyes on me, I could not get it. After I confessed that I'd never had it before.
Wow.
Excellent. Yorkshire pudding down in London. I don't know, that's something of heresy over here. I think you ought to get yourself up to Yorkshire for that. But, now, you mentioned that you were in Newcastle. That's actually, I was born just down the road from there. How did you find that contrasted to London as a place to visit?
It was a very enjoyable place. I actually did the Newcastle Ghost Tour, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I can tell you now, if they put an EMF meter in my hand, it goes squee. So that means I attract ghosts, I am ghosts, or I've actually got a battery stuck in my palm somewhere. But yeah, that was part of what happened on the tour. But Newcastle was a lot of fun as a walking city. As I said, Ubisoft sends me all over the place for work to go to various studios it has around the world. And the thing I like to do most is after work, just wander around and sort of try and get the feeling for a place. And it was very enjoyable, strolling through the streets of Newcastle at night and just sort of soaking it up.
Well, it's got an interesting topography. It's not a huge city. It's it's reasonably sized, and it's got the little hills and stuff going on in it. So yeah, oh cool. So what are you reading at the moment? Anything that's particularly cool?
I'm a reading omnivore. So I literally have a book for each room in the house for when I wander into that particular room. Also 2 in my car, and you get the general idea.
Yeah.
Well, I'd see. I'm working on Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. Ligotti is an author whose work I just absolutely love. It reads beautifully, it sounds beautiful when you read it out loud, and just the ambition of his imagination is fantastic. So I'm working through that, but it's not something I can read more than a few pages of at a time, simply because there's so much and it's so rich. I just finished up a Willem Pugmire short story collection, Douglas Clegg's Neverland, which is an absolutely brilliant horror novel. And let's see, I think next I'm going to be jumping on Jeff Vandermeer's Third Bear. One of my deep dark secrets is that I do book reviews for Green Man Review and Fantasy Magazine, so every so often large piles of books appear on my doorstep, which keeps me happy and contented until I chew through them with insane rapidity.
Nice.
So, and as for your own work, what are you working on at the moment?
Let's see. I just wrapped up a video game ghost story called Vaporware.
Ooh.
They say, write what you know. So we'll see where that goes. Thanks. Yeah, it's what happens when the project doesn't want to get canceled. So hopefully folks will find that enjoyable. And John Hay, who's a friend of mine, and I just collaborated on a private detective novel where the private detective is a Sasquatch. So we'll see.
Awesome.
Oh, wow.
So working title is The Big Feet. My wife wasn't speaking to me for a while after I told her that one. She's not big on puns, but...
Excellent. Now, as for books in general, is there a particular book that you wish you'd written that you didn't?
Um, all the time. Like I said, I'm an omnivorous reader. Our house is decorated in books. I think we have 23 bookshelves full.
Oh, wow.
And there are so many books that I've read and gone, this is wonderful. I wish I'd done this, or I can't do that, or what can I learn from this? Some of Thomas Ligotti's work, obviously. Some of the Oxrun Station novels by Charles Grant, which I think are just these brilliant, delicate little masterpieces of modern horror. John Myers' Silverlock, which is just absolutely filled with joy at literature. I don't know if you've read that one, but highly, highly recommend it. And there are so many great writers out there writing now that it is a wonderful time to be a writer and just sit back and enjoy, and not look at stuff and go, and nitpick or anything like that. Just appreciate all the talent. Dan Simmons, Tim Powers, Jeff Strand, James Moore. There's so many great writers out there whose work I can just sit back and get lost in.
Outstanding. Now, I guess you'll have noticed that those last few questions were stolen right from your essay on 7 things you should always ask a writer.
I wasn't going to say anything for fear of looking like I'd, was thinking a little bit too much about my own writing. But
Cool. So the one that I've left off is, can I buy you a drink?
Absolutely.
Well, actually, Vince will have to do that. But I'll tell you, you should look me up next time you're in the UK, and I'll more Yorkshire pudding in.
Short drive to Pennsylvania, where the land of the free writers are, the free lancers. Why am I saying free writers?
Well, let's see. I'm actually going to be passing through Pennsylvania fairly shortly, so be warned. But
oh no!
There you go, Vince.
Richard showing up at my doorstep. Where's my drink?
Just stay far from I-95 and you'll be fine.
Oh no! Oh no!
The one question in that essay actually I just think would be interesting to hear is, what's your process for writing? How do you go about it on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think the important thing is, one, to have a daily basis for writing. You need to be comfortable writing, so you can actually sit down and do it. The more comfortable you are, the more relaxed you are, the easier it is to get stuff going. If you stop and start and never really sort of build up a rhythm, you always have to fight against all the distractions and remind yourself in a writing state, to get into a writing state. My process tends to involve my sitting down in my office, which really is sort of a writer cocoon. When we bought the house, that room was painted lavender with pink trim and a lovely, delicate lavender and white border up at the top of the room. And I looked at that and said, I'm not writing in here. So we
Sounds like my
down.
microphone.
And I remember Jackie Casada and Nikki Rowe talked about the world of insufficient illumination, but so we took that down and painted it a very dark, almost would you say blood red, with a dark gray trim. And so now it's my personal chamber of horrors, filled with all my horror novels and my cryptozoology reference and my North Carolina ghost story reference and all these character jugs that are just basically disembodied heads with handles on them. Various bits of art from the White Wolf days. Ron Spencer's Railroad picture from Wraith Second.
Oh wow!
Apprentice piece from Charnel Houses, and the Rasputin picture from Puppeteers. So that creates sort of the space where I can write. That place says this is where you write to me, and I turn off all the lights and turn on the appropriate music. And this is going to sound terribly twee, but I actually make a playlist for each project I'm working on of appropriate music to sort of help me get in the mood. And when I hear that stuff, it reminds me, okay, you should be working on this project now. And that has a good and a bad to it, because after I'm done with the project, I sort of can't listen to that stuff without immediately wanting to go back and do some more edits. Drive-By Truckers and Tom Petty and Johnny Cash were dead to me for about 6 months after I finished up Firefly Rain.
Nice.
Yeah,
and then I just sit down and sit in front of the computer, and I've got the music going and the right light, and if I'm lucky, it flows.
That's interesting. It's interesting, the comment about music. Long-term listeners will know I'm a really obsessively unhealthy fan of Clive Barker, and he paints in the evening and plays music while he paints. But he says that he doesn't like playing music while he writes because he finds that the rhythm of the music dictates the rhythm of his writing. But you find that it actually complements the written word?
It does. Well, first of all, bear in mind that my collection is filled with stuff like Van de Graaff generators, so the word rhythm is not really applicable. um, I think a lot of music is intended to create a specific mood and a specific tone, movie soundtracks in particular. And if you pick the appropriate stuff and you know the mood and the tone that you're going for with your characters and your story, then you can get a good synthesis of that. It's not. I don't throw my iPod on shuffle and in the middle of working on a horror novel. Oh wait, here come the Go-Go's. That doesn't work. But I'll sit down at the start of the project and say, okay, this is a ghost story set in the Deep South. Who's appropriate? Johnny Cash, particularly the American recordings, absolutely. Tom Petty, yes. Drive-by truckers, yes. Kentucky Headhunters, yeah. Styx, not so much. No. And
Sticks.
Winger, no.
yeah, I'm trying to think of a project where Winger would be appropriate, and I'm not finding it. So if you can come up with anything, let me know. But
All right, well, we'll give you some White Lion. How's that?
no.
Okay, Mark. I think you had one last question or two.
Yeah, I was just gonna be mean and ask you where you get your ideas.
How does that mean?
Richard wrote another essay saying entitled 7 Questions You Should Never Ask a Writer, and that was on there. So.
I know.
The standard answer to that question seems to be someplace in upstate New York. And whether it's Poughkeepsie or Schenectady, people seem to like answers up there. Utica, I think, gets called a lot too. But both of my sisters went to school in upstate New York, so I'm going to leave that as their territory. In terms of where I actually get my ideas, everywhere. It's a case of looking around the world and saying, okay, what happens if I give this a little twist? And a lot of times they come out of specific images. And that just sort of imprint themselves, and I say, okay, how do we get to this tableau? What does this mean? Firefly Rain, a lot of the central impetus behind that came from the first time we went out to my wife's family farm in Missouri. And I'm a city boy. I grew up across the street from a golf course. I think deer are still exciting wild animals, while anybody who's worked on a farm knows that they are very tall rats with a really good publicity agent. But this was, my first time out on the farm. And the first night, she took me for a walk on the property to show me where she'd grown up. And the moon was full, and it was, this is way out in the middle of nowhere, a little town in Missouri called Millersburg. And, so the sky was filled with stars, and the moon was so bright you could read by it. And we're walking through these fields, and the property next door, the lot had been allowed to grow up with woods. It was, very thickly forested, and the shadow that these trees cast and where the line on the ground lay was so sharp. I mean, it was absolutely clear, absolutely razor sharp, and that image of one piece of land bathed in light and one piece of land absolutely pitch black really stuck with me, and that turned into the image from very early in the book where Jacob, who is the narrator, comes home and he sees the family house and the family farm absolutely dark in the middle of all these fields of fireflies, and the fireflies won't come onto his land.
Wow. Okay.
So from that image, I was able to extrapolate back, okay, here's how we got here, here's what it means, and hopefully here's what it means going forward.
Nice. That's a strong image.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have 3 last questions for you, and Mark knows the very last one, but I'll save that one. Now, we'll go back to your White Wolf career. Did you have a hand in the Trinity line, or did you have any input on that line, or was that just something you didn't touch at all?
I was involved in the world building, the design for that. I wrote with Bruce Baugh an adventure series for that. Did a lot of the design and writing for the Escalapians as well. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of fun. Andrew Bates was the developer on that, and he was less of a science fiction nut than I was. So when he started working on that, I would just walk into his office with a stack of books and say, okay, here's research. Oh, and here's more research, and here's more research. And I think I may have frightened him with giant stacks of Arthur C. Clarke. But that was something that I was involved in. Really the whole company pitched together and worked on that. But it was a lot of fun working on that, and actually the chance to collaborate with Bruce, who's a friend and I think an insanely talented author, on those adventures was a lot of fun as well. And you can see where I snuck a couple of my personal obsessions in there. There's a section in I think the second book of that adventure trilogy where they're talking about lunar baseball and people hitting the ball 3 miles and things like that. So it's fun just sticking grace notes like that into a science fiction setting.
Cool. I have to look for that now. I haven't looked at those books in a while, but now I have to look that up. Awesome. If White Wolf contacted you today and said, Richard, here's XX amount of money that you want, what would you want to write? What would you like to see written? What would you like to develop with them?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I know.
Wow, that is not a question I've thought about. Let me preface it by saying that I am satisfied with the work that I did there. That I thought I brought it to a good close. I'm very proud of the work, and proud of the opportunity to work with the folks that I did work with there, both in-house, people like Ethan and Aileen and Rich Thomas and Brian Glass, absolutely wonderful people to work with, and the freelancers, Bruce, Jeff Grabowski, James Morse. It really was a wonderful body of work to be a part of, and I'm happy leaving it where it is. All that work and that legacy, for lack of a better word. And I know that sounds horribly pretentious, but that was a lot of love and a lot of effort and a lot of care.
Right.
That I'm, if I never touched it again, I would still be very proud of it. If there were one project that I could do, I would love to, I guess, take another crack at Wraith. And it's had some time to rest. Mm-hmm. I still think there is tremendous possibility in that world, and maybe it would be in a different format. Maybe it would be shifting it over to a fiction setting. Maybe doing it as a video game. Everything I think about is in terms of video games these days.
Well, yeah.
But I would love to go back and explore there. I'm very glad we got the chance to wrap up with Ends of Empire, and I think that was a fitting conclusion to it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's an awful lot still out there that I wouldn't be too upset if I got the chance to go poking in those dark corners again.
Cool. Wraith. Excellent.
Okay, and since this was your first appearance on the show, we always ask all the writers and authors this one question, and that would be, if you could be a household appliance, which one would you be and why?
Let's see. I've been accused of having a certain cheese gratery personality.
Oh.
But I'm not sure that technically qualifies as an appliance. So I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten track and say stick blender here.
Stick blender. Nice. At least Eddie Webb decided he wanted to be an iPhone, so...
I'm not sure that counts as an appliance, really.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. No, that's why I always bring it up. And he's
I have to remonstrate with him about that.
Yeah. Well, Richard, it's been a pleasure, and we thank you for coming on the show and talking about your works and your history and what you're currently doing. And I think our listeners want to know, to wrap things up, how could they follow you or contact you or get in or maybe even stalk you if they wanted to? No, I'm kidding about the last one. Your website, maybe you want to plug, and your works?
Sure, absolutely. My website is richarddansky.com. I'm rdansky on Twitter. Always, there's an email address on the website. Always love hearing from folks. I'm a terrible correspondent, so I apologize if I don't write back immediately to anybody who writes to me. But it has been a pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you, Richard. We really enjoy you taking the time to talk to us, and it's been a really fascinating insight into your work and where you've been and where you're going. So yeah, really, thank you very much.
It has been a pleasure.
Well, as we're wrapping things up for number 20 of the Darker Days podcast, we'll be back maybe next week, Mark, right, with another one action-packed show. I think we're going to be doing another Darkling and then 2 more episodes.
Before you can blink, yes.
I think we'll be ending out June with a whole bunch of interviews and segments and wonderful little yada-yadas. And This has been the Darker Days podcast. I am Vince signing off from Mark. Good night, everybody.